Hey everyone, welcome. Excited to have you here. My name is Dave Dubin. I'm here to talk to you about how to make the right leadership hires and how to save millions in lost productivity and efficiency and switching costs. We've got a few minutes before we get started, so I'll talk about some housekeeping as we continue on, but I'm happy to have everyone here. I'll repeat this a few times for those who have just started, but happy to have everyone here who's here. If you showed up on time, well done. You can also help me out a lot, actually, if you can hear me. So if you couldn't hear me, you didn't hear any of that great intro from before, but if you can hear me, I'd like to know a very important part of this presentation is being able to hear me and being able to see the presentation. So if you can hear me and you can see me, if you could do me a great favor and type in heard, if you watch the Bear Show, heard, that would be great. And then I'll know that you can hear me and you can see me. And I'm seeing a few comments, so that's great. So you can hear me, wonderful. While we're waiting to get started, please let me know, where in the world are you? I'm tuning in from Austin, Texas, United States. So go ahead and write down where you're from. I've been to a few webinars and I've noticed that I've sometimes been in the same place as someone else. And since I think Austin is such a cool place, it's always excellent and awesome to know when someone is nearby. Please do that, then you'll see who's near you. For those of you who are just joining, we are going to get started in just a little bit. This is about how to make the right leadership hires. I'm going to give you a strategic framework for how to do this so you can really understand how to make leadership hires, how to optimize your process, and how to make sure you're just bringing in the right people for the most important jobs. This will help you save millions in lost productivity and efficiency and switching costs. So I'm glad you're here. This will be a good use of your time. While we're here in the spirit of LinkedIn, also, if you're just joining us, you'll see people posting their locations. Just post what you do, who you help, those kinds of things, and feel free to link in with other people. This is the whole point of LinkedIn, is to connect with people who can help you, who are like-minded. And if you're not connected with me, I invited a lot of my first connections, so I hope you are, but if you're not, just use this time as we're warming up to get linked in with me. So connect with me, and I will definitely accept, especially if you say where you're connecting from, that you saw me on the webinar. So I'm looking forward to meeting all of you all. Again, we're here to make the right leadership hires. Today, I'm going to share a framework for how you can do that effectively, how you can get the right leadership hires, continue to optimize over time. And while you're doing that, save millions in lost productivity and efficiency and switching costs. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. For those of you who are interested in SHRM credit as you go through this course, if you want to get SHRM credit, stay till the end of the class, and then at the end of the webinar, just comment SHRM credit, and I or someone from my staff will reach out to you and tell you how you can get that SHRM credit and activity code, okay? So I think we're probably about ready to start. If everybody can hear me and see me and people have written down where they are in the world and start connecting, I think we're ready to get going here. Just a little more housekeeping about how this is set up. I'm going to explain as much as I can in 45 minutes or so. We probably won't be able to cover it all. Not that I'm going to skip slides or anything, it's just that there's a lot of details to all of these things. I'm going to be talking about a high-level strategic framework. So if you want to get more details and you want to get more into the tactics, I'm going to share with you how you can get more information if you want it, and also how you can get a freebie, how you can get a free leadership skill map, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that is later on. But I'll explain how to get that. Just understand, and feel free to write questions in the comments as we go along, but just understand that there will be an opportunity to get more information as we continue going on and doing this presentation. There'll be an opportunity after the webinar too. And to that end, you can do this later on too, but as you're thinking about and anticipating this webinar, what are you hoping to get out of it? That's always something that I'm interested in. So what is your most important question about leadership hiring? I want you to put that down in the comments too, and I guarantee you I'm going to answer your question. So even if it's not in this presentation, I will reply via comment or I'll direct message you. But if you have a question, I want you to write down what you're trying to get out of this presentation, what your most important question is about leadership hiring, so I can make sure that it gets addressed. That's important to me. Okay, so quick introductions. You all have done a nice job of introducing yourselves in the comments. and where you're from. I'm from Austin, Texas. My name is Dave Dubin. A few things about me that I think are relevant to this presentation. I have a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. I got that from the University of Houston. Go Cougs. Hopefully we have some University of Houston people out there, or some Texans. I'm the founder and principal of People Strategies, and if you've seen my headline on LinkedIn, that what I'm interested in is bringing science and strategy to hiring decisions so that we can make high-stakes hiring decisions better, and we can use data to do that. I'm also a senior partner of talent management at Intelligence. So this is a firm that focuses on HR consulting specifically within the private equity space. I'm a former faculty member at the University of Texas at Austin, McCombs School of Business, so hook 'em. I'm also an alumnus there from undergrad. And I guess most relevant to this presentation is I've been doing leadership assessments for a while now, and I've been doing them at a very high volume. So I've assessed and debriefed hundreds of high-level leaders, from managers to CEOs, from small companies like startups all the way to Fortune 100 companies. And I've done it for individuals who are living in almost every continent in many countries. And it's something that I just love to do. And if you look at my recommendations on LinkedIn, or you talk to anybody that really knows me, you know that this is one of my favorite things to do, is doing leadership assessments specifically for selection. So that's why I thought I'd put out this presentation and share some of the knowledge that I have in this area with all of you. So let's first talk about who this is for, because that's important when you're getting on a webinar and making sure that this is going to be a good use of your time. So specifically what I'm thinking about who I'm speaking to right now on the webinar, this is about making good leadership hires, right? So it's most important for hiring managers. So these are usually people who are the direct supervisor of the leader who is being hired. Usually they're functional leads or HR leaders. And HR leaders, it's important for them, not just because they too are hiring functional HR leaders that sit under them, but also because HR leaders it's part of their function to help support the hiring managers in who they're going to choose. So when I do leadership assessments, usually my clients, the people who are sitting on the other end of the phone when I'm debriefing about candidates, are the hiring manager of whatever function we're talking about, and usually like the director of HR, who's trying to help and assist in that decision-making process. And then finally, C-suite leaders. These are individuals who are at the top of the organization, and they're interested in this not just because sometimes we're hiring CEOs or COOs, etc., but also because these are the people who are setting the culture and they're setting the strategy for the organization. And it's important for them to make sure that the leaders who are getting selected into the organization match well with that and fit well within the organization that these senior level leaders are creating. So these are the people, right? And what they're most interested in, or sometimes what they're most afraid of when hiring a new leader or hiring anybody in a high stakes situation, one of them is the financial cost of a poor leader. And so when we talk about financial cost, there's a lot of different financial costs that we think about. So some of them have to do with just the recruiting cost. So the amount that it costs to recruit and train and onboard a leader, if they turn within a short period of time, then doing it all over again. So that cost in and of itself is very concerning, but also what are they going to do when they're in the organization if they're not a good fit? So for example, there's usually a concern with the stakeholders that I speak about of whether they're going to bring a new leader into the organization and whether that leader is going to create a toxic environment that's going to affect the business through the people. So creating an environment where the leader isn't accepted by their direct reports or by their peers or by the senior leadership, and that toxic environment leads to negative outcomes, negative financial outcomes, and negative personnel outcomes for the organization. Another thing that's on the minds of the people that I usually speak to and who this webinar is for, the hiring managers and the HR leaders and the C-suite leaders, is succession planning. So to the extent that we can be proactive enough to understand that we need to be planning for the future and planning for growth and planning for retirement and planning for all sorts of other things, who is going to fill these pivotal roles, these pivotal leadership roles that may become vacant. And so that's another thing that's on the minds of people who I usually speak to. There's also brand and reputational risks. So bringing on leaders that are going to have a lot of responsibility and in some cases be the face of the organization, it's very important that these are the right people and that they fit, not just within the kind of core competencies of the leader, but within the kind of culture of the organization that they're going to be going into. And then lastly, the strategic setbacks. So we bring in leaders to continue a strategy or innovate and transform on a new strategy, and to the extent that they're going to make wrong decisions or they're going to slow things down, these are the concerns of usually the stakeholders that I speak to. So if this encompasses what you're interested in, if you're going to be hiring for a leader because you're a hiring manager, an HR leader, a C-suite leader, and you're concerned about any of these things, this is the right presentation for you. This is the right webinar for you. I suggest you stick around and ask some questions too. And I should say too that you're right to be concerned with these kinds of things that I brought up. Because if we look at some of the statistics, we know that 79% of employees quit because of a lack of appreciation from their leaders. We know that manager quality affects 86% of job satisfaction of their employees. From an organizational perspective, leadership behavior itself accounts for 15 to 30% of the variance of organizational performance. So these, and we already knew that they were pivotal roles, but to put numbers on it too, highlights that. And teams that have effective leaders see an increased engagement of about 37%. So leadership is important. Unfortunately, we know that 50% of managers are rated as ineffective. 60% of new managers fail within 2 years. Only 14% of companies have a strong leadership bench. So that gives you a sense of that succession planning. And 65% of teams are led by disengaged leaders. This is not good. And we're in a situation where we know how important it is to have good leadership based on all of these outcomes. We know anecdotally that leadership is important based on the experiences that we've had. And so because of this, obviously organizations have spent a lot of time and money, energy, and attention to ensuring that they get the right leader. But yet these problems still happen. It's still difficult to find a good leader for your organization. So the question is, even though the motivation is so high to do a good job in this situation, to find a good leader, why are we still getting so many failures? Why are we getting so many kind of leadership kind of disasters that we see? Some on the news, some in these statistics, right? I can say based on my experience and working with a lot of clients, some of the reasons why this happens, why even through our best intentions, you want to pick the best leader, you end up failing in some situations through no fault of your own because of several different factors. I'll go through a few of these here. One is infrequent practice. And what I mean by this is, even though if you're like in a retail organization, you may have a really good strategy for selecting customer service representatives. Or if you're a healthcare organization or you own a hospital, you may have a really good process for selecting in nurses or nursing assistants or those kinds of things, because these hires that are happening at high volume and you're just doing it over and over again, so you get lots of reps. Now when you think about how often do you hire a CEO, or how often do you hire a COO, or even another senior level leadership position that might be below the C-suite, you don't actually do that often, and so you don't get as many reps and enough experience about how exactly to go through that process and how to assess those people. And part of the problem is this second bullet here, is this unclear criteria. So while you might have a pretty good sense of what you're looking for in, let's say, a customer service representative or a barista or a certified nursing assistant, it might be less clear what you're thinking about looking for in a high-level leadership position. That might not be as clearly defined. And another thing that can happen here is that if you have skilled interviewers, so you have these leaders who have been going from these different jobs to different jobs, they've done lots of interviews in their life. So if you compare the difference here between the interviewers who have less practice hiring these leaders and the people who are being interviewed having a lot of practice, there's a little bit of difference here in the experience. And the result here is you get a skilled interviewee leading the whole interview and telling you everything that they want to tell you without you getting enough information about that person. That person may also have, this interviewee may have self-awareness gaps and miss out on just the things that might be their own weaknesses and might be some development areas that they don't even understand. And with competitive market pressures, insufficient tools, what you get is usually a lot of information, because generally these are long talent acquisition processes, but that information isn't concise enough, or it's not good enough so that you actually understand what decision you can make, what you should make rather. What does this lead to when you have too much information and you're not sure what information you actually need is and what the most appropriate information to concentrate is on? You get bad hires, and you get bad hires because of biases. Again, these are like these shortcuts that our mind makes. When it has too much information, it says, all right, well, let me just figure out what my gut tells me or what's easiest. There's lots of biases that come up in selection. There are whole books written about biases. I'll talk about a few of them just to give you a sense. Confirmation bias is having a reason that you want to pick somebody that's already in your head, and all you do during the entire selection process is look for different reasons to hire this person, and you ignore any possible reasons why you should not hire them because your mind is saying, we just need to hire this person. A similar to me bias is selecting individuals that are just like you. And you may not even be doing it consciously, but because they had a similar background or they look similar to you, you just like them in a specific way. If we were to combine these into an example, the confirmation bias and the similar to me bias, think about maybe not even you, but let's say your CEO went to Harvard and the COO that you're looking to hire also went to Harvard. So all of a sudden, this is a Harvard graduate. They're probably really smart. So now we're looking for other reasons why this person is the best fit. And also the CEO is saying, well, I went to Harvard. I would love to have another Harvard graduate there. So you're looking for reasons to hire this person, and you're probably going to amplify that person's strengths. And you're probably going to not think too hard about why this person may not be a good fit. And this last one, survivorship bias, is just focusing on what a lot of companies do, is focusing on a benchmark of top performers without also looking at how they're differentiated from poor performers. So they overemphasize the similarities across the individuals at the top, which also reduces diversity, along with perhaps having them select the wrong individuals. So we get these bad hires that are driven by these biases, and the question is, how do we solve for these? How do we solve for these particular issues? We know that we have these kinds of biases, but we really don't know what we're solving for exactly here, and that's going to be the first step to eradicating this issue. And so what I'm going to posit in this presentation here is that we have these symptoms. We have these bad hires that we know are coming from biased information. We get a lack of diversity. Also, if we have specific kinds of biases that focus on similarities around the people that we already have. We have long talent acquisition processes because we're afraid that we're going to select the wrong individuals into the organization, so we try and de-risk it by having everybody interview this person and interview them perhaps more than once. And we end up still, after putting all this energy and time into this, we still get this hire, fire kind of quick merry-go-round when we're hiring these leaders, which is very costly and expensive. But these aren't the root causes. These are the symptoms, all right? The root cause of all of this is actually measurement. It's a bad measurement issue. And even though that doesn't sound that sexy, this is really what's going on here. And I want to explain this, and this is the focal point of this presentation, that if you are failing in your leadership selection program, then you're having a measurement problem. And there are three kinds of measurement problems that you might be having. So one of it is measuring success within the role. And what I mean by that is, how are you defining what good looks like? So there's lots of different ways that we can think about positive leadership. And there's lots of TikToks and LinkedIn articles and LinkedIn memes and other posts about that, about what good leadership looks like. But sometimes they end up being antithetical to each other. You want someone who's like innovative and strategic and has a vision, but also somebody who rolls up their sleeves and is a servant leader. Obviously, you can't do both of those things. There's some nuances, but you can't do both at once. So you have to define what good looks like in your organization with your challenges that you're facing right now. with the team that you have, with the industry that you have, with the market that you have right now, you have to define what a good leader is going to look like in those situations. And if you don't do that work up front, then you really don't know what you're looking for. And then it's really easy for things like bias to creep in. Once you've identified what success looks like in the role and you have your success factors or competencies and skills, you need to be able to confidently measure success within candidates. So once you've identified what you need to measure, you have to have a good way of actually measuring that within the candidates. So how do you see that within the applicants that you have? How can you be confident that if what you want to measure is strategic leadership or visionary leadership or innovation or anything else, that you actually know whether this person possesses it or not? And then the last one is, how do you measure the success of the process? And I include this one in because even if we feel like we're doing the right scientifically rigorous and methodologically rigorous process of identifying success within the roles and identifying success within the candidates because we're using the best tools and we're spending a lot of time with these candidates, the real question is, are these people successful, right? That's where the rubber meets the road. So we need to make sure that we have some kind of feedback loop, some kind of process to understand if this whole thing is working. Because, for example, even if we did the most perfect job, if the person who's making the decision doesn't listen to the data, then we're obviously not going to have a good choice, or perhaps there's something wrong deep within some of these processes. So we have to have a process to understand whether things are working or not. And these together, these make up these kinds of measurement issues. So if you're having difficulty with hiring the right leader in your organization, it's going to be one of these reasons or all of these reasons. So that's what we're going to cover today in today's webinar, about how do we solve these issues. Now that we've identified the problems, we'll talk about how we can solve them. So let's start with the first one. How do we measure success within the role? How do you measure success within the role? What we do at People Strategies is we do something called skills mapping, right? So we are identifying the specific leadership skills that are necessary for success within this industry, organization, role. So all of the context of this role, we identify the specific skills that they need. So how do we do that? And first of all, I'll just mention again, if you want to get this for free, I'll tell you how to do that at the end, how to do this leadership skills mapping for free. But what we do is we start out with a role data review. And so this has to do with understanding the full context of this leadership role within the current time frame, within the current organization. So lots of people have job descriptions, but of course, what goes into the job description and what's left out of the job description, there's a lot of information that can be included in there. So certainly, we always know what the job title is, but the question is, what is going on with the industry? What is going on with the organization itself? What kind of team does this leader have? What kind of manager does this leader have? And what are the mission critical things for this leader to do in this particular role now and into the future? Because we need to identify what success is going to look like for this leader and what context are they in, so we can understand what kind of characteristics this person needs in order to do those things. That's really how we measure it. So we're getting lots and lots of information so that we can then summarize it down into competency modeling. So we're getting so much information from subject matter expert interviews and surveys. Sometimes we might even use ONET. And we have all of this information, and our job is to summarize it down into a few, maybe 4, 6, 8 competencies that we check over with the subject matter experts to say, are these the things that this leader needs to do to be successful? And we see lots of differentiation. We can't just use the same competency model across different organizations, across different industries, because, as I mentioned, some organizations really need that strategic leadership. They really need to have somebody who is going to scale the organization and grow it. And some organizations don't want to grow at this moment. They want someone who's going to continue the way things have been, moving along in more of a tactical fashion, and be someone who's very hands-on. And it's different across organizations. The needs are different. So it's important to figure out what is most important in that time. And we do that through competency modeling, so we can get down to specific categories of traits that we're looking for in an individual. And the last thing that very few organizations do is importance ratings. So we've taken the time to go through the kind of vast array of possible competencies that a leader can possess, and we've narrowed them down to several, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But the importance of the importance ratings is saying that some of these are going to be more critical than other ones. And given all else being equal, I care a little bit more about these competencies than I do these competencies, because you can't always get everything that you want, like house hunters, right? No one ever gets the exact house they want. And so there's going to be strengths and development areas across all of the competencies, but we want to make sure that we're leading with the strengths and the most important competencies, or at least areas that we can develop. And I know that this is a bit abstract, so what I've done is I've made it incredibly concrete about what kinds of things you get. This is actually a little more reductive than what you would actually get, but just so it would fit on the screen, I'll give you like a few different examples here. So if we have, for example, a CEO in a manufacturing organization, and the big challenge that they have is that they're expanding globally, we might be in a situation where we have the most important competencies are someone who has a global perspective and someone who is really focused on operational excellence as defined by this organization, and somebody who is really focused on visionary leadership, so really strategic kinds of things, and also cross-cultural competence, because they're going to be needing to travel around and be agile across these different cultures. Now, on the other hand, on the right side here, you see a COO of a healthcare organization, and their main challenge is they're going through digital transformation. So now there's more of a focus on more of the things we think of as a different kind of strategy, right? So innovation as a strategy, but still maintaining process improvement and team leadership and compliance, right? So it's different sides, perhaps of different coins here, because these are different organizations that are going through different kinds of challenges. And you'll see that there's also different importance ratings across these different competencies based on what these fictional subject matter experts are saying are most important. This is critical to understanding what you're looking for in a leader and having that before you have your first interview with someone. So that gives us a sense of what we're looking for when we're defining what success looks like in a role. And so the next big question that we talked about in measurement is, how do you measure success within candidates? So we've gone through the trouble of identifying these competencies. Again, in real life, these will be a little bit more clear and laid out. There'll be definitions. But if we think about a global perspective and operational excellence and visionary leadership, now we're to the point where we have to figure out how we're actually going to measure these things in the candidates that are coming through the pipeline. And so to do that, we use what's called multi-method assessment. And when we're thinking about multi-method assessment, we're trying to figure out the truth about a leader and the truth about a person. And basically what we're thinking about doing in those situations is understanding that if we just use one method of assessment, and a method is just like a specific way that we're doing it. So an interview is a method of assessment. An interview is understanding an individual through maybe 60 minutes or 120 minutes of asking them specific questions. That's going to give us some really good data, but it's only going to give us one type of data, the type of data you might get from an interview. We also want to get information from some psychometric assessments, so perhaps some personality and some cognitive ability assessments, perhaps some other things. The point is that when we come after these different competencies across different assessments, we're going to have a much better shot at really understanding who the candidate is. Because if we just have one shot at finding out if this person is a visionary leader, then we're going to have lots of opportunities to miss it, right? It's easy for that leader to say perhaps they're a visionary leader without providing enough information to back it up. But if we have lots of information from their personality and their cognitive ability to think strategically and a few structured interview questions, we're able to triangulate on those particular competencies. Let me give you some more information about this too. So when we're thinking about the psychometric assessment, I think it's important to recognize that not all assessments are created equal. And what I mean by that is, the first thing I mean by that is, are you measuring the right stuff? We've done all of this work previously to identify what are the critical competencies that we're looking for in this particular role. And so the question is, are the assessments that we're using actually overlapping with these critical competencies? So if we're trying to measure whether this person is a visionary leader, but what we're actually measuring are some kinds of interests, right? Or some kind of specific values, that's not going to get us there. We need to have specific assessments that kind of touch on that visionary leadership that's going to help us. The other aspect of it is, are we measuring the stuff? And so there's a little nuance in switching those last two words, because if we're able to measure the right stuff, then we're saying that we're at least trying to address the right competencies. But measuring the stuff right means that we're using assessments that have actually been used in situations like this before and have been successful. So if you have assessments that have been used on leadership populations to predict visionary leadership, then that gives us more confidence that we're actually assessing the right things. All right. And this last element is, what are the limitations of even the best assessments? Some of the best assessments out there, we like to use Hogan here for our personality and work styles assessment. Even the best assessments are going to say, this is just one data point. So our models are probabilistic. We can't say for sure that a leader is going to specifically be like this, which is one of the reasons why we need multiple different points of measurement, interviews, cognitive ability, what have you. But it's important to figure out what your limitations for your assessments are, because some assessments don't have the data to back up some of their assertions. So that's important to recognize as well. As far as different examples of assessments, there's work style, personality, EQ assessments. Again, we use Hogan Personality Inventory, and there's assessment suites, but there's also OPQ and Berkman and others. For cognitive ability, several assessments out there. We tend to use Watson-Glaser or Raven's progressive matrices for inductive and deductive reasoning, but there are other assessments out there. Simulations and role plays. There are some in-basket assessments where leaders are acting like they're leaders in fictional organizations. There are role play assessments where someone like myself would act like a direct report that needs a performance improvement plan, or perhaps a difficult coworker that they have to work with. And then there's also biodata or leadership practices assessments. So assessments like leadership effectiveness assessment that gives you a sense of their specific experiences they've had and how that predicts their kind of behavior as a leader. So all of these assessments can be used together along with a structured interview to help give you a good sense of who this candidate is. And when we're talking about structured interviews, there's, again, many books that have been written on this one, but in a nutshell, we're looking for interview questions that are job relevant. So, of course, we have to make sure that we're focusing in on those competencies that we've identified in our previous step, and we're asking behavioral questions, not descriptions. So we're asking about specific experiences they've had when they had to outline a plan to be a visionary leader, and we're not asking them, are you a visionary leader? And that we're asking the same questions across these different leaders, so we can assure standardization, and we know that we're measuring apples to apples. So when we do these kinds of structured interviews mixed with the assessments, then we're getting our best chance at truly understanding a candidate and where they are on these different competencies that are so important. And by the way, we have a free structured interviewing web class, and if you want that, just write structured interviewing in the comments and we'll make sure that someone sends that to you. So the question is what do you get from this? So the ideal situation here is that you are using all of these pieces of information, these multi-methods of assessment. So we have psychometric assessments, personality, cognitive ability, interviews, and through that we're integrating the information so that we can arrive at a single score for each competency. So what we do is we measure each competency on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 means that if they really don't have this particular competency and they have a lot of growth to do in that area, and 5 means that this is a really huge strength for them in this competency area. So we're looking to integrate this information. Again, this is a bit of a reductive view of it, but if we're looking for this, let's say, CEO of manufacturing that's trying to expand globally, for candidate 1 in this fictional example, we gave them a 3, 3, 4, 5 across global perspective, operational excellence, visionary leadership, and cross-cultural competence. And for candidate 2, it's the opposite, right? And this is why it's so important to define these competencies so that we're able to score them on the specific competencies that are most important for this role. But you can see that it's also important that we have these task importance ratings, because candidate 1 and candidate 2 actually have the same types of scores, the same numbers of 3s and 4s and 5s. And so if you were just looking at averages, they'd be the same. If you were just looking at counts for how many times they have a 5 or a 3, they'd also be the same. And so in a lot of situations, and I've seen this at other leadership assessment companies I've worked with, then we have to go back to the drawing board about, they seem like they're about the same, so who should we pick? And then the biases just creep back in. So the benefit of having these importance ratings is that now we can have a weighted average. So 40% is multiplied by 3 and 25% is multiplied by 3, etc. And we end up seeing that candidate 1, whose strengths are in the areas that are less important, has a weighted average of a 3.5, and candidate 2, whose strengths are in the areas that are most important, has this weighted average of 4.05. And now all of a sudden our decision becomes a lot easier about who is going to be the best fit in this organization. Both of them have lots of strengths. It just so happens that candidate 2 has more strengths in the areas that we care most about. And now we have a data-driven way of arriving at that conclusion. So now we've identified what success looks like, along with having importance ratings. And then we've found out how to measure that kind of success within the candidate so we can make a data-based decision. And so now the question is, how do you measure the success of the process? Because a lot of people stop there. And they say, again, we have a very rigorous approach to identifying what the important competencies are, and we have a very rigorous approach to identifying whether the candidates that we have actually possess these competencies. So I guess we're done. We're not done, because that's not really the criteria. That's not really the outcome that we're looking for. The real outcome that we're looking for is, now that you've made the hire, are they going to be successful? Did we do it right? So how do you measure the success of the process? We measure the success of the process with a feedback loop. We call this validation as an industrial and organizational psychologist, but really it's a feedback loop. So we start off with our data-driven recommendations, right? We've done all of this hard work so that we can identify what are those important core competencies. And these are the scores for each candidate in these core competencies, because we've used these data-driven assessments and these structured interviewing techniques. And because of that, we're able to make this selection decision a lot easier for the hiring manager, because we can see in black and white who is going to be a better fit. But now the question is, how is this person performing? So if we look across different ways of measuring performance, from a quality of hire kind of review, to a performance evaluation, to a 360 survey, to objective metrics as far as the mission critical things that they needed to get done, how well are they doing, and how closely are those outcomes associated with the recommendations? So some of it is about the recommendation. Was this person recommended, and did they do the job, yes or no? But we can even go back to those specific scores, and we can say, what's really driving their success? maybe we got this wrong. Maybe it was the visionary leadership that was really propelling this person forward, and it wasn't the global perspective as much. Maybe we missed a competency, or maybe we found out that this is the wrong choice because we ended up picking candidate 1 over candidate 2 because candidate 1 went to Harvard or something like that. And we know that even though we went through this whole process, the decision makers didn't actually listen to it. Only through going through this kind of feedback loop can we understand what's going wrong with this entire process, if there is something going wrong. And if there is something going wrong, then we're able to optimize it. That's what science is about. Science isn't about getting it right every time. Science is about doing your best guess, your hypothesis, and then keeping really good records and going through a rigorous methodology so that if something doesn't work, you can find that point in the methods and say, okay, we're going to tweak this so that now it works. And then we're going to get better data-driven recommendations over time, and things are just going to continue to improve as you learn more and more about what works within your organization and who the best leaders are going to be. So just as a recap here, leadership selection programs fail because of measurement issues. If you're not measuring success within the role, you don't know what good looks, then you're not going to have anything to measure people up against, and then bias is going to creep in. If you don't measure success within candidates the right way, then you're not going to have a good way to actually score these candidates. So then bias is going to creep in, because even if you've identified what you're looking for, people are just going to say that they have those competencies so that they can get selected without any rigorous ways of validating that. And if you don't measure the success of the process, then you don't know if it's actually working or not, and you can't optimize anything. So these are our 3 pillars of the way that we do leadership assessment to combat these kinds of measurement issues. We do skills mapping, we do a multi-method assessment, and we do a feedback loop. And again, as a recap, skills mapping involves a role data review, understanding all of the context of what this person needs to do to be successful and the context in which they're working in, so that we can understand the competencies, the characteristics of what it takes to be successful, and then assign importance ratings so we can be very specific about what it takes to be successful and what's more important and more critical than other things. We use a multi-method assessment so that we can be sure we're completely understanding the individual. We're not putting too much emphasis on just an assessment or just an interview or just an interview with this person. We're putting all of the information together and integrating it so that we can have a score that gives us an apples to apples comparison across these different candidates. And then we have a feedback loop. Performance ratings like quality of hires, 360 studies. We use our assessments to create a development plan so we can ensure success and optimize the process. And that's how it works. But I understand that this is a lot of information. I've spent my whole career learning about this stuff and trying to summarize it, and still I know it's a lot of information. That was a big slide. So if you're feeling like this, I want you to know that I want to talk to you. All right, and if you want to book a free strategy call to learn more about this process, or if you just have questions, just type strategy call into the comments, and me or somebody else from my organization will get in touch with you and talk about how to have a strategy call with me. If you want a free leadership skills mapper, if you want me to help you do skills mapping, which is the role data review and the competency modeling and the importance ratings, and you want to do that for free with me as part of the strategy call, you can still type in strategy call. That's the best way to get that done. And me or somebody from my staff will get in contact with you and we can talk about doing that. If you had a good time and this was informative, please let me know. If not, if you have any feedback, let me know. If you want a recording of this, just type in recording. But that's it. So I want to thank you again. If you want SHRM credit, type in SHRM and we'll get that information to you. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar. Please connect with me if you haven't, and I hope you have a very wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.